The following are two passages from my recently released book, which is available both in Kindle and paperback form. The title of the book is Reflections on the 2020 Scamdemic. You can find the link below in the description. Excerpt 1. In their all-out effort to villainize the unmasked, and later the unvaxxed, the lockdown propagandists made recourse to the basest of human emotions. They appealed to the primordial fear of contagion and to the primitive loathing of the outsider. As a result, human compassion for the sick evaporated rapidly, replaced by an induced collective hypochondria, which encouraged one not to see his fellow human beings as people, but rather as mere potential vectors of infection. It little mattered that the virus in question wasn't any more dangerous than the common flu. People were still heavily pressured into viewing it as a plague-like phenomenon that posed some kind of existential threat to human civilization. It would not be exaggerating at all to say that heaps of patently murderous scorn were directed at lockdown critics. In some places, countries which are widely considered to be free, no less, people were actually physically assaulted, manhandled, and arrested for not wearing masks outside. Non-violent lockdown protesters were literally beaten with billy clubs. Cops raided houses of worship, demanding that the faithful disperse. These and other atrocities went down in ostensibly free countries, places that aren't assailed by watchdog groups as authoritarian or dictatorial. That these edicts were blatantly unconstitutional in the United States, and no doubt in violation of the enshrined laws of most Western countries, made little difference. No constitution anywhere successfully stood in the way of this operation, although the extent of the orchestrated tyranny obviously took a more extreme form in some places than in others. The scars inflicted by those who were unfriended, abused, shamed, scolded, threatened, attacked, scapegoated, treated as if they were subhuman, haven't yet healed. The pretext chosen by the lockdown supporters, that those who resisted the tyrannical edicts were, quote, killing grandma, unquote, has been quietly forgotten, just as the vituperative screeds directed at those who refused to get injected with a highly dubious vaccine have been dropped into the memory hole. Apologies from the former abusers and bullies have been few and far between, barely even existent at all. The, quote, pandemic amnesty crew just wants to, quote, move on. But the degree of cultural damage done cannot be underestimated. Indeed, as writer Naomi Wolf argues persuasively in her book, Facing the Beast, there is just no going back. Goodwill amongst the large number of those abused has been largely obliterated. Such folk are neither inclined to forgive nor to forget, and certainly aren't the least interested in any self-serving, quote, amnesty. A growing number have been, quote, radicalized, to invoke the scare word often wielded by establishment stooges engaged in disingenuous rhetoric. But this radicalization has not been the result of hate groups or right-wing demagoguery. Instead, people have been radicalized, naturally enough, by being kicked around ruthlessly by petty tyrants and their legions of hall monitor minions. That is to say, they have been radicalized by bitter experience with those who hate them and whom they have learned to hate back. Excerpt 2. Looking back with hindsight, it is indeed contemplation of the massive degree of coordination between corporations, television networks, academia, law enforcement agencies, religious bodies, and activist groups which took place during this period, which truly takes one's breath away. Prior to 2020, Few would have thought that these various and diverse bodies would all unify with such rapidity. Few, if any, would have imagined it were possible for them all to coalesce around a shared cause, and that cause would in effect amount to an effort to put the entire world on house arrest for an indeterminate period of time. The degree of unification behind a singularly totalitarian project of attempted simultaneous control of hearts, minds, and bodies becomes all the more remarkable when one considers that the lockdown project was international in scope. This means that nations of the world, even nations in a state of enmity with one another, nevertheless were persuaded to join forces in order to enforce what were deemed to be the mutual desirable conditions of the nearly global lockdown. That this coordination was achieved should give everyone pause. It should inspire somber reflection concerning the matter of, quote, how the world works, unquote. Contemplation of this matter ought certainly to knock the conspiracy mockers for a loop. For so many years it has been the refuge of those scornful of conspiracy theory to declare, you're insane if you actually think that so many different people and so many different organizations, some of whom don't even like each other, would all somehow be able to team up and pull off the kind of complex project you have in mind. Mr. Conspiracy Debunker, if he were honest with himself, would find his own premises utterly scattered, scrambled, smothered, covered, chunked, and topped, in the memorable parlance of the Waffle House menu, by what happened in March of 2020, when every conceivable culture-shaping entity suddenly unified behind the massive project of shutting down the world. How was such coordination possible, unless perhaps these seemingly disparate and even competing entities could all be brought to heel simultaneously by a centralized authority, one which transcends political factions or even nations? Comedian George Carlin once noted, "There's no need for formal conspiracies. When all of these economic and political elites share the same ideology, which they learned from their environment growing up in similar positions of privilege within the dominant culture. One wonders if perhaps such an astute observation provides explanatory cover for the rapidity with which all of the authorities at every level suddenly became harmoniously synchronous in the twinkling of an eye. If this is so, then one marvels at the horror of this seemingly shared ideology, which alike valued making Earth effectively into a prison planet, all under the most specious of pretexts."